Okay, folks, we're just going to get ourselves started now. It's just after 10:30, and that's when we said we'd start the webinar. So I'm going to, fortunately for you, swap over to the presentation now, and we'll get started. Okay, so welcome to the webinar on community benefit societies. They're also called CBSs and bencoms. And I guess as we go through this, I'll try and stick to bencoms, but I know from past experience I kind of end up using all three of them as we go along. So that's what the webinar's about. I'm going to go through more general kind of overview of community benefit societies. The intention is to have another session with Stephen Phillips of Burness Hall, a bit more technical and a bit more into kind of delving into things. So hopefully between the two of us, we'll be able to give you a kind of really good sense of understanding of what community benefit site is about, and you go away from both these sessions feeling like you really know some real technical details about them, but the broad overview and where they kind of come from, legal underpinning, these kind of things. So it should take around 20 minutes for me to go through this. That's my intention anyway. We'll have time at the end for some questions. There's a little chat box. I think you can get that by just taking to the bottom of your screen, or at least that's how it works on mine. And you can flick that up. And if you've got any questions as we go through, please feel free to put them into that chat box. As I'm doing it, I may not kind of see them, so really I'm intending to take questions at the end, and we'll run through that. So if you've got anything that you can think of as going through, you want to clarify, please do that. It may be something that's technical, and it may be something that I can refer to the next webinar for that. But we'll do our best to answer them today. And I should say, of course, this is getting recorded, and it's live as we are. If you happen to be watching the recorded version of this, you'll not be able to use the chat function. You will obviously just have to take whatever we've got on the day. But myself at Community Share Scotland, or our colleagues at COS, are always happy to answer your questions anyway. So without kind of further ado, we'll head off. Kind of overview here, really my sort of three takeaway messages of what I'm trying to get across today, which is pretty simple. One, that these are democratic and member-owned organisations run for the benefit of the community, and we'll delve into that a little bit today. They're eligible for community asset transfer and community right to buy, or certainly can be made eligible within the rules. So in terms of that opening up opportunities, that's certainly something useful. And I guess that's where the third part comes in, is that they are increasing in popularity. So maybe some of you are starting to hear a bit more about them, or just coming across them, because groups and community organisations are starting to use them as a governance form, particularly around things like asset transfer, but for single projects as well. And this ability to bring share capital and investment into a community benefit society is quite important too. And so that's another reason why that's becoming increasingly popular. So my name is James Procter. I'm from Community Share Scotland. We're asked to do this because we almost exclusively use the community benefit society model to do all kind of community share issues. In fact, you either need to be a community benefit society or a cooperative, so very limited in terms of that. So nearly all of our work is with community benefit societies, and I guess we sometimes feel that these are very straightforward and easy, but I guess for others that are more used to other legal forms, these are a bit maybe new and unusual. So hopefully today we'll go through that and you'll have a better understanding. So what's on the agenda? What is a bencom? They're a better understanding of their legal position, what underpinning comes from, what the benefits are, why people might want to use it. And we've touched on some of those things already. How do you incorporate? It's a little different to doing a company into a guarantee or a scheme. So how do you incorporate in the kind of process? And a little bit on how they're financed. As I say, it's one of the kind of key drivers we see increasing the usage. And I think it's important maybe for you guys to understand, why somebody's maybe want to go down that route rather than something like a scale or a company limited by guarantee, or even a KIC as well. So what's bencom? You can read the little bit there, pretty straightforward. The key thing to look at really, I suppose, is that this really kind of narrows down pretty quickly in terms of what it is as a structure. There's a bit of flexibility within it, but it's quite limited or quite well defined as a structure. It has to be democratic. It is a not-for-profit, and the purposes have to be for the benefit of the community as a whole. And that's quite a tricky one sometimes, that benefit to the community. It has to be almost a benefit that goes beyond purely that geographic community. There has to be some sort of benefit more widely, and we'll maybe just kind of delve into that a little bit as we go along. The community can be of a geographic community, which are more sort of traditional, but it can be a community of interest as well. And it can be a mix of both. So an area, I think of somewhere like Glenwillis Distillery up in Dingwall, very much based around the kind of geography, a tourist destination, as well as a distillery, but clearly Scotch and Scotch whisky is a community of interest that's worldwide as well. So that kind of straddles both. So, that defines fairly quickly that, particularly around the democratic angle, there's no real capacity for this to be anything other than democratic. So, that does start to limit its appeal for some maybe social enterprise kind of groups that are maybe want to be more defined by one or two people kind of driving that forward. This is going to be something that's being member-owned and democratically member-owned. Legal position. So, starting point for us really, I suppose, is the Cooperative and Community Benefit Societies Act of 2014. But I suppose before that, I mean, you've got a long history of community benefit societies. This is not just something that's kind of new or come about. The Cooperative and Community Benefit Societies Act was a consolidating act, brought a lot of things together around coops and community benefit societies, and effectively really made a kind of clear definition between the two. Cooperative societies, generally speaking, are going to be for the benefit of the individual members of that society, whereas a community benefit society, effectively, whilst there may be some benefit to the membership, largely the benefit is to the wider community, so it's a more altruistic model. They are registered with the Financial Conduct Authority, so quite different from normal companies, and it's through the FCA that all the work is done, so registered through them, and annual returns are sent through them. And the mutual registrations section of the FCA are the home and the registration body, rather than regulator, really, of community benefit societies. Some might be familiar with Memorandum and Articles of Association for things like companies limited by guarantee. Instead of that, they use a set of model rules, tend to be much more in-depth than Memorandum and Articles of Association. They tend to define much more clearly certain processes, electing the board, how to take on members, that kind of thing. Much more clearly defined, and usually, quite a process. So quite, usually a good sort of 10, 15 page document rather than maybe something a bit thinner, and really does define quite a lot. So there's usually a little bit of work to be done by a group that wants to start a bencom, or in that early stage, maybe a little more work than you might do for other legal forms, just because you really want to get it right at the start. Of course, changes can be made to it, but think a bit more about what you can do at the start of the process, and then subsequently, you can make little changes to it, but those can be a bit more time consuming and a bit more awkward. As I say, known as bencoms or CBSs, all interchangeable, and I guess because they're still pretty thin on the ground, and because there's not a huge understanding of them, that kind of terminology still gets kind of thrown around. So there's no one obvious thing that would be called. So community benefit sites can be a bit of a mouthful. Bencom seems kind of easy to me. CBS has seen it written up as that as well. So legal position, very much defined by the Cooperative and Community Benefits Act, but they've got a long history well before that as well. Benefits, okay, well, why would you kind of use them? These are some of the more obvious things in terms of legal underpinning. Limited liability and asset lock. The asset lock is usually written through a clause that says any disbursement of funds on the winding up of the organisation would go to a similar organisation or similar charity. And they certainly can't be distributed to individuals, so that's a block on anyone looking to put money into it and somehow benefit from something, the winding up of the organisation. As I say, they're democratic, and it isn't really one of the key features. That's one person, one vote as elected directors. There's still capacity to bring in other directors, experts to assist, but fundamentally the board will be elected from the membership of the organisation. They can be charitable, and sometimes people kind of wonder a little bit about that, whether it can or can't. Well, we've had 2 or 3 now that have had charitable status. Patrick Harbour, one of the first, although I think there was a community shop up in the Outer Hebrides that was charitable before that for some reason, but they managed to do that. Poor Patrick Harbour gained charitable status. That's been about 4 years, 3-4 years now. 2 or 3 others have followed in their wake. Also view them in exactly the same way as they would view any other organisation looking to be a charity. You simply have to pass the charity test and obviously have in your model rules the kind of objectives that would be notionally charitable. And in our case, obviously always worth mentioning, but it is a kind of important feature of them that they can issue this unique share capital. It's effectively an unregulated share issue. It means that it's very low cost, but it also means you still have the onus to be upfront and honest with people about how you might take money. Shareholders would tend to will become members of the society as well, and so that's one of the kind of key drivers is this effectively exemption from quite a lot of tough regulatory work that a company would normally have to do a share issue. And because of the nature of community shares, they don't gain in value, but they do give a say in the organisation. That basically means that it's an investment in an organisation that is probably want to do something great for the community rather than for a sort of personal increase in people's wealth. So that's how they get the exemption from that. Why use the structure? Well, as I say, I'm kind of reiterating a little bit here, but the Community Empowerment Bill Act in particular made it a named model, so I think along with maybe the 2 or 3 others. So that started to increase a bit of understanding about what bencoms were. This eligibility for community asset transfer, therefore, and community right to buy started to make some groups be quite interested in it about how they might run a sustainable enterprise out of that asset and out of, say, a building or a bit of land, and how they could do that. And therefore, actually, a community benefit society offers that opportunity to not only, as a named model, to ease that process of doing the community asset transfer, but also then subsequently to run perhaps a business or enterprise out of that can be owned by the organisation as well. Enshrines community governance and operations, so it means that members are the owners, and so it aligns those two things quite nicely. It can be quite key for people to actually feel that the organisation that is providing the benefit is also one that's run by them and for them. And it enshrines a democracy within the structure. As I say, there's things you can be flexible about, but you can't be flexible about the democracy. It's going to be a one-person, one-vote organisation. So there's no way around that, and so it really suits those communities who really want the community to be equal partners and equal members in this in the organisation. And therefore can boost community engagement when those two things are aligned. And that's, I guess, what we've seen people really kind of taking that model forward, because they really see this as a way to not just get people to support them, but actually to become personally involved in this process. And there's nothing like that for actually demonstrating that people in a community are really right behind this idea, and they actually are willing to either put money in or certainly be involved as members of the organisation as well. Incorporation can be a little tricky, a little different from the maybe more simple process of doing a company limited by guarantee. So I'll run through this. You can see 2 or 3 kind of sort of steps to this, and 2 or 3 kind of bits to think about. A sponsoring body is on the FCA's list. So basically, a sponsoring body such as the Development Trust Association or Cooperatives UK, Plunkett Foundation, and there's several others as well, will effectively develop their own model rules. Something that they think would really fit a particular sector normally. So Plunkett Foundation do stuff in rural development, shops, pubs, that kind of thing. Cooperatives UK have got more generic rules, but also things around housing. There's things in agriculture and other sectors as well, credit unions. So sponsoring body develops that rules, which can be quite intensive and take a bit of effort and a bit of money to do. And then they make them available to groups to use. And really anyone can use them, but they have to come through the sponsoring body. A group would then take those model rules and they would amend them, usually on some form of template, so making some choices, size of board, particular objectives, but trying to limit the amount of changes, because there's a sort of sliding scale. I mentioned at the bottom there, the sliding scale of costs. The more changes you make, the more the FCA charge you for that part of the registration. So they'll put in things about the key objectives, about the key issues around objectives, around geography, what they want to achieve. And then that basically goes to the register with the FCA. And that can be a little bit of a time-consuming process. It can take a few weeks, quite frankly, to knock that back and forward. I think the FCA work just now on trying to register community benefit societies, 90% of them within 15 working days. So you can kind of see the timescale that they're dealing with there. And as I say, those costs are on a sliding scale for the registration with the FCA, but there'll also be a cost usually to the sponsoring body for doing some of the legal work to do that. So Cooperatives UK, DTAS, Plunkett, whoever will have a kind of cost for their particular part of the process. And then there's a cost to the actual registration with the FCA as well. Not outlandish, but the FCA sliding scale starts at £40. I think £120 for making up to about 10 changes, and then it goes to £350 for actually 6 changes, and then £350 for 7 to 10 changes. And then it gets a bit more expensive beyond that if you're making substantive changes to it. And that's the reason why sponsoring bodies try to make a set of model rules that are quite very close to what they would expect an ideal bencom to look like in their particular sector. Then a group coming along can make a relatively simple a few changes to that, and that kind of does the job, keeps the cost low. And then the fee from the sponsoring bodies will probably be in the region of £200, £300, something like that. So not the cheapest, something you've got to think about. There is a cost to it, but there is a bit of legal work to be done just to kind of get that registered. Financing, I think it's worth saying, because as I say, this is one of the kind of drivers of them, and it's worth just kind of using this to kind of just make sure people feel comfortable about what the bencom actually is. So things like grants, loans, donations, all still available. They don't have to be funded by a community share or some kind of finance or debt or anything like that. And most community organisations, they can be funded in exactly the same way. In my history, I've used a lot of community benefit societies in sport and things like that, and nearly all of them are voluntary led and grant or donation kind of dependent, or just run through money from their members. They're not looking to be large or grow sustainable enterprises. So perfectly fine to use a community benefit society for those reasons. The additional kind of benefit, as I say, is that they could offer shares or even debt, so community shares or community bonds. We've used quite a lot of these in renewable energy, quite often funded through part community share issue and maybe part debt as well. I've seen a couple think about using a bond issue separate from a community shares type bond, which is more unregulated, so they've been able to use regulated finance. They can get loans from social investment organisations as well, like Social Investment Scotland or Big Society Invest, Big Issue Invest, sorry, Big Society Capital as well. So, lots of different options open to them, and I guess that does offer up interesting kind of opportunities for them, in terms of if you have got a kind of enterprising idea that you want to fund and you want to capitalise, you need startup money, and you can't just completely bootstrap it from a little bit of volunteer effort. If you really need that cash, which most little organisations do when they want to start business, then it's a great way to kind of finance them. And as I say, I think one of the reasons why we've seen an increase in interest and growth in them as well. So we've used them for all sorts of community enterprises, pubs, shops, harbours. You can read the list there. Always interested in kind of exploring new ideas, so things around housing, around social care, healthcare. These are all kind of interesting areas. Some of that's been done down south, so we're starting to see some really pioneering stuff in the use of both bencoms and therefore in the kind of community shares as well. So I'm hoping that's given you a kind of reasonable overview of it, fairly kind of quick run through. As I say, 3 takeaways that I would really have for this is that really thinking about the organisation as a democratic and member-owned organisation, you really cannot get away from the fact that it's going to be democratic. So it has to be a kind of specific set of circumstances for groups that really want that to be a kind of key part of what they want to do. And I suppose that's on the flip side of people being more interested in them. That's also, I guess, one of the mildly limiting factors, is that not every group wants this to be entirely democratic. They're eligible for community asset transfer, community right to buy, obviously kind of key issues that are on the agenda just now, and this ability to bring in different types of share capital are one of the kind of things that's making them more popular. But they've got that limited liability, so people are not putting their money on the line. This is not a voluntary group that's unregulated or has unlimited liability. Limited liability, you're only going to lose the money that you've put into the organisation. It has the asset lock, it has the ability to have charitable status as well. So all kind of useful things, which I think level the playing field a little bit when groups are looking at different governance models that they might use. Downside, as I say, that kind of length of time it might take to kind of get up and running, but hopefully they've kind of thought that through. A bit of upfront cost at the start, but hopefully worth it in the long term for the organisation. If you want some more info, there's our website address up there. The FCA have got some stuff about registered societies. Co-ops UK have got some good stuff as well. Co-ops UK are effectively the membership body for co-ops and community benefit societies, that kind of thing. So they've got some good information around their community benefit societies, and also their Simply Legal kind of booklet actually has got a good little comparison as well within different types of legal model that co-ops may want to use. Because you don't have to use this form to be a cooperative, you could structure a company limited by guarantee in a kind of cooperative way as well. But for community benefit societies, want to do share issues, this is the best model to use. A little bit on us, very briefly. As an organisation, we're funded till June 2020 through Big Lottery Funds and Scottish Government. We do training, advice, support. So if there's anything you kind of need In terms of, because we use the bencom model quite a lot, we're absolutely happy to have a chat about bencoms, even if not necessarily going to lead to a community share issue. But obviously, always on the lookout for share issues as well. But the more bencoms there are, the more chance there are of the organisations accessing our services through community shares. And there's my details. And so, happy to take any questions from you. Get in touch if after this webinar, or indeed, of course, this webinar is going to go online afterwards. So if you're not able to use the chat function just now, you want to ask a question, you want to follow up on something when you're just watching this after we've done it live, then feel free to get in touch with us. As I say, we're funded till June 2020, so hopefully be around at least till then, if not beyond. So that's the end of my little bit. I'm going to have a wee look at our chat box now. And this is the tricky part, and see if there's any questions, and I'll kind of read them out as we go. If you've got any more questions, just stick them in there. I can see 2 or 3 already. So feel free to just stick in that chat box any questions you've got, and we'll just kind of answer them. And then once it looks like we've exhausted everybody, then that'll be us for today. Okay, so we'll start off with a little question here about how do funders view bencoms? My general view is that I think that it's a mixed bag just now. You've got some that completely understand what a community benefit site is, what a bencom is, and are happy about it. We've heard some anecdotal evidence of people kind of asking more questions, not being too sure. We occasionally still see the odd, I wouldn't say mistake, but maybe misunderstanding of what they are around some funders. And so there's a little bit of kind of continuing work to be done. If anybody knows anybody who thinks that they've been rejected because they've been from a funder because they've been a bencom, then we'd be happy to hear from them. But I think generally speaking these days, they're starting to appreciate, and because of the kind of 3 or 4 years of work that this organisation's done, they're starting to see that this is, starting to understand it a bit more, see what benefits it has. And I think they kind of in some ways are quite interested in the fact that even they as funders could potentially be investors through a community share issue as well. So there's kind of opening up new and interesting opportunities for them. Next question, is there a scale of organisation that a bencom would be appropriate for? Well, actually kind of a bit of everything really. I suppose there is community governance and community democracy in it, so something that would be really tiny, I guess, is going to, it's got maybe unlikely to have a great wide membership, or, and maybe only talking about, 50, 60 people here, anything less, maybe of that kind of size, you might be able to do it through a different method. But generally speaking, on the small side, I think it would work for most. As I say, I've used them for certainly voluntary organisations, and they're fairly small, but want to have a membership base, and it's been fine. I guess there can sometimes feel like a little bit more governance to do in a community benefit society than maybe something like a scale. So in that regard, maybe if it was really small and quite limited, maybe a tough choice. On the big side of things, on the other side of things, I don't really think there's a kind of limit to it, but I guess again, once you get up to really big, I guess you're still just a more complicated organisation, but actually can deal with its membership, can deal with thousands of members, bit of governance to be done with it. So yeah, to be honest, I don't think there's a problem with size and scale. From a funding, from a kind of community shares point of view, we kind of talk about community share offers probably no more than, no less than 30,000, just because there's a bit of work to be done. We've certainly done something up to about 2.5 million in community shares, so a reasonable sized small business in those terms. And I think once you got maybe beyond that kind of 2, 3, 4 million pound mark, commercial lenders might well be interested in you. Next little question, is the ongoing governance of bencoms more challenging than other company forms? I suppose I've touched on that a little bit. I think if you're going to run a democratic organisation, and maybe particularly where you have to write into your rules around a local cohort or local set of board members need to be, say, in the majority. So I think what we've seen with something like the Scottish Land Fund, and understandably for the purposes that they're using that money, they want to see proper local accountability and very strictly defined geographic area. And therefore, there can be a little bit more work to be done to make sure that who's within the correct postcode and who's out with it in terms of membership, and therefore making sure that board is elected appropriately by those that are in the majority of the local area. So a little bit more on that side of things. A little bit more kind of paper governance with the FCA. They're a little bit behind where, say, Companies House are in terms of electronic filing, but hopefully they're catching up a bit. There's some consultations on the go just now around reducing annual fees, and also we've created a new little kind of way to actually do some of the returns online. So catching up a bit, it's one of the slight bugbears of the kind of co-op sector that the governance and the regulatory registration form is still a little behind where Companies House is, but catching up hopefully. Next little question. Could you have a company limited by guarantee with a bencom subsidiary? So the quick answer is no. And what you would do, so bencom, if you think about it through its particular structure of having members as being the owners of it and democratically the owners of it, therefore you can't be a subsidiary of something else. So organisations that would normally use a subsidiary and maybe do a trading subsidiary can you still use the bencom? And DTAS, the Development Trust Association Scotland, have developed a set of rules that can probably be used by can be used by other organisations as well, which creates quite a neat link between the two organisations. So it makes it as close to a subsidiary as you could get with a bencom without actually being one. Creates a kind of a set of first of all, it usually means that certain directors from the Development Trust will be, or the company limited by guarantee will be on the board of the bencom. It won't be a majority, but they will have direct input into the governance through directors being reserved for them. There'll also maybe be some reserved powers within that can't be exercised without effectively the kind of golden share of the organisation limited by guarantee or the Development Trust or community organisation. So it does have some kind of neat limitations to it, but it still allows the members to define how the company the enterprise is going to run and how this is going to be taken forward. So as close to a subsidiary as you can get without being one, which you can't be. A couple more, well, 3 more questions here. So if anyone else has any more, just feel free to type in there and we'll get to them. Next one is, could you use a bencom structure for part of a community asset transfer? As I've suggested during the kind of presentation, yes, you can. I'm not the expert on asset transfer, but it's a named body within that legislation, so it absolutely can be used for community asset transfer. Obviously, the process would be the same as any other community asset transfer, so there should be no difference just because it happens to be a community benefit society. Next one. Okay, so should organisations just future-proof by setting up as a bencom, even if they don't ever do a share issue? I'm biased. I say everyone should set up as a bencom, but I do recognise that they are pretty good reasons not to. I think there's definitely something about an organisation having to think about what its long-term future is, and whether actually they have aspirations to be enterprising and aspirations to do things that may well require a bit of capital and equity input, or large-scale loans if they think of it as that way. If that's something that looks like it's on the horizon for the organisation, then I think, it's pretty worth them thinking seriously about whether the bencom would be the right model for them, even if at this point in time they're not going to avail themselves of those kind of services. There's a slight increase in governance, I think, but it wouldn't be so much that I think it should put organisations off. As I say, I may have a slightly biased opinion on that, but I think that they are as good as other organisational forms. I think I can see where, maybe for quickness of starting up or something like that, then you might think about going down another route, and that maybe circumstance brings that upon you. You can then potentially set up a community benefit society, and it could be that kind of subsidiary type relationship, more of a sister or partner organisation, but quite obviously linked to the other. And the other way to do it, obviously, is if you do set up as something else, then you can do some sort of conversion. That takes us into a slightly tricky area. So companies limited by guarantee, relatively straightforward to convert into a community benefit society. It's almost all the assets and everything stay within the same organisation. It's really just a change of wrapper, a change of model, a change of governance. A little bit tricky, but relatively straightforward. It gets harder if you're set up as a scale. If you're set up as a scale, then that can't be converted. So you'd have to effectively create a new bencom and do a transfer of assets and liabilities and staff and employment and all grant funding over to another organisation, to this new organisation, and close down the scale. And you can still, of course, get charitable status for the bencom. So we've kind of gone through one of them just now, and it wasn't going for too long, so the amount of complication wasn't too high. It's certainly more complicated to transfer from SCIO and take all the assets and move them into this community benefit society. But still completely doable. And I do understand that, if time is pressing, then sometimes you need to get something set up relatively quickly. If you've got the time to think about it, I think, at very least consider a bencom as an option. Last question I think I've got just now. I'll have a wee look for some more in a second, but how many bencoms have been successful with community asset transfer from public bodies? I'm afraid you've got me there. There's been a couple. So Bridgend Farmhouse in Edinburgh certainly had an asset transfer. Now, whether it was through community asset transfer, I'm not entirely sure. But they did a transfer from City of Edinburgh Council for the farmhouse building themselves. Got quite a lot of grant funding to refurbish the farmhouse and do some new build stuff onto it too, and then did a community share issue as part of that kind of wider financing. They've got a cafe in there. They wanted some other enterprising things that they wanted to do, so use the community share offer. And so they wanted to set themselves up as a community benefit society in order to take advantage of that and have this kind of like this membership locally. So it was quite important to them. So yeah, Bridgend Farmhouse are the one that most obviously comes to mind. There may have been one or two more. Yes, thank you. My colleague from Cost has reminded me that Rockfield School in Oban, I think, was also an asset transfer as well. So we've had at least a couple of them. And other cases we've worked on, something like Govanhill Bass, and I'm not sure the exact circumstances of the ownership of the building, but obviously it was a long campaign to get ownership of that. So they've used community shares as well and set themselves up as a community benefit society for that purpose. So 2 or 3 that we're starting to start to see, and I guess part of this webinar to some degree is to maybe help that process along a little bit as well. And we're always happy to kind of chat about how a bencom might well be used if there's an asset transfer, kind of an organisation that's looking at asset transfer just now, and to check out and help out with them if that's the right model. And our colleagues obviously at Cost, the Community Ownership Support Service, are more than happy, and within their guides as well kind of mentioned about where bencom kind of fits in that whole structure too. Okay, if we've got any more questions, I think that's the end of my little list. I'll just have a little check to see. Okay, yeah, let's just check through the other chat function. 2 more questions I've got here. How narrow a geographic basis are bencoms limited to? So effectively they're not. That would be completely up to the community to decide. The ones that we've seen most narrowly geographically focused are the ones that have taken funding from somebody like Scottish Land Fund, who have their own desire to have a very clear geographic basis for that. That said, the bencom can still take membership and therefore can still take community ownership, community shares money from people out with the area. So it's not a block to people joining as members or investing in the organisation. What you have to structure appropriately is the governance within the organisation that makes sure that local control, and therefore the majority of board directors are from the local area, and that people in the local area have effective control, majority control of that. So that can be structured within the Community Benefit Society. But in terms of the actual bencom, it's really defined for the FCA's purposes around what their test is effectively a little bit opaque and a little bit ambiguous around what is community benefit. So they're more interested in what the organisation is actually doing rather than where it's doing it. And that's not the necessarily important part. A lot of communities do use them. They do use them on a geographic basis because they're trying to deliver a project or an enterprise service that is quite geographically focused. But as I kind of mentioned, you do also get that kind of community of interest. So, to pull one out of the hat, I mean, if a kind of historical rail society wanted to use a bencom or community shares to fund, a kind of small private railway, one of these kind of model railway things, then they could do that, and I'm sure people from around the UK, maybe wider, would be interested in getting involved in that, investing in that. But the people who are probably going to be delivering that are going to be people more locally. So it's a mix of local and geographic. So from the bencom point of view, there's not a block on the geographic side of things. You will quite often write into the rules, because of the nature of the organisation, you might well write something that is around, serving a certain community, but that can be quite loosely defined. It's more about if you're going for particular funding, that's the thing that tends to, you need to therefore live up to their standard. and therefore you need to write into their rule, into your rules, something that will satisfy them. Is there a specific training covering the legal roles and responsibilities? You'll generally find support and specific training from Cooperatives UK. And they also run a service called The Hive, which is more around co-ops and community benefit societies, around general governance for the kind of important positions, chairperson, secretary, in particular treasurer, financial training, but they also do HR stuff and that. So that's generally where people would go to look for training kind of activities. And because the market, I guess, in terms of co-ops and community benefit societies is not enormous, there's not the kind of huge amount of options in terms of private organisations that are doing some stuff around that, but specifically on legal roles and responsibilities, Coops UK is probably the best place to look for actual training. Obviously, we provide through Community Shares a handbook for bencoms and for community share issues as well. So, certainly where we're around, and maybe as part of our legacy with our colleagues down south in Wales as well, in England, we've got the Community Shares handbook. So on our website, communitysharescotland.org.uk, you can have a little look for the handbook as well. And that's gets pretty intensive in terms of detail around that side of things. And if you've got some legal questions, obviously I'll plug for the second webinar in this series with Stephen Phillips from Burness, I think on the 12th of February, and he'll cover maybe some of the more legal kind of detail underpinning bencoms as well. Last question I've got just now, but feel free to post any more before we finish. Can a bencom set up a scale to help achieve its objectives? This is getting me thinking. I don't know enough about the schemes to know whether they could actually be a subsidiary or not. I get the feeling they probably wouldn't be. So whether the bencom might already be charitable and therefore want to set up a scheme, I'm not sure why it would want to do that. If the bencom wasn't charitable and wanted to set up a sort of charitable arm, it certainly can set up subsidiaries. But whether a scheme can be a subsidiary of something that's not charitable, I am not too sure. So I'm sorry to not give you a great answer to that question, but I'll keep a note of it. And if I can't answer it later on, maybe Stephen Phillips can do a better job than I can. So yeah, they certainly, in terms of bencoms, they certainly can set up subsidiaries. So that may be an option. Okay. As far as I can see, no more questions and no more on the chat either. I'll give you a last little minute to think of anything that you kind of want to ask. It feels like a real quick run through of it. Hopefully it's given you a kind of sense of what a bencom is. It's not too outlandish, it's not too strange, but it's definitely different. And I think sometimes we find the trickiest thing is that it's almost a parallel course to something like a Company Limited by Guarantee, in that it deals with the Financial Conduct Authority rather than Companies House. And the terminology can be quite different and the structure can be quite different around how they register. It's probably worth saying as well that the FCA don't really act as a regulatory body, but they do have a bit of regulatory control. Bencoms will do an annual return to them every year, and then within that they have to continue to justify why they are still providing a benefit to the community. But once you've kind of done that through your first, through your registration, it should pretty much be the same. Are you continuing on with the business and enterprise or organisation aims and objectives that you did in the first place? That would be enough to satisfy them year on year. But they could take a view that if somebody has moved far away from their community benefit objectives, then they could reasonably ask them to dissolve. Also, if you don't file your returns, they can ask you to dissolve as well, and they will chase you for that. So, there is a little bit of regulatory control, but it's not a regulator in the sense that they will be really looking as to what the organisation is doing on a kind of week by week, month by month, or will do inspections or that kind of thing. It's really just most about this regulatory function. So I guess it's that kind of stuff that maybe just sort of makes people a bit less aware. One of the advantages, of course, is through our programme at Community Share Scotland and through COS, DTAS and others, is that as the amount of community benefit societies grows, I guess people get a bit more familiar with it, and hopefully that's what we can achieve today, that you feel a bit more comfortable with what bencom is and how it can be used. Okay, thank you all for listening in. For those of you who stuck around, if you're watching this on the catch up, then I hope that's kind of made some sense. If you're still around, then get in touch. always happy to answer your questions, always happy to have a chat about bencoms and listen to what's going on. But thank you for your attendance today. And as I say, next webinar is on the 12th of February with Stephen Phillips, hopefully going into a bit more technical detail on the legal aspects of bencoms. Thanks a lot, everyone.